When my brother and I were born, our parents brought in a psychic to predict our futures. The psychic told them my brother would develop severe depression because of my success in school, and that on the day SAT scores were released, he would jump from the school rooftop and end his life. To save him, they spent 18 years tearing me down. On exam day, they confiscated my ID. I begged them not to do this. My father kicked me into the walk-in freezer and locked the door from the outside. Your brother's going to die because of you. And yet you still want to take that exam. You want him dead? Is that it? The freezer was set to -22 degrees. All I had on was a short-sleeve school uniform. I pounded on the door with everything I had. Mom, it's so cold in here. Please let me out. Oh. Quit the act. My mother's voice was high and razor-sharp. The freezer isn't even on. Your brother is this close to being free of that prophecy. And yet all you can think about is yourself. Her footsteps faded down the hall. Blood kept running from where I'd hit my head, dripping onto my uniform and going cold almost instantly. I curled into the corner as my body stiffened slowly, 1 degree at a time. My limbs felt like they had been filled with lead. On the other side of the door, I could hear Darren Merritt, my older brother. Dad. Mom just let Wes out. His grades are amazing. You can't make him miss the SATs. Shut up. Mom's voice was sharp and furious. How can you stand there and defend him? Have you forgotten what he did the year he got first place? How he was standing right in front of you showing off? I knew exactly which time she meant. I was 10. I had scored a perfect 100 on the math test. 20 points higher than Darren. I ran home holding the paper up so excited. My face was flushed. I'm better than Darren, I had said. Darren went pale. Mom burst into tears on the spot. And Dad came at me and slapped me so hard that I was knocked to the floor. Blood ran from my nose, dripping onto the test results. I had been so proud of that night. They locked me in the freezer to think about what I had done. And by the time they let me out the next morning, I could not feel my hands or feet anymore. He's always been calculating. He knew about that prophecy. And still came running home to wave it around. He did it on purpose. Mom's voice was ice cold. I slumped against the door. I did not even have the strength to shake my head anymore. That was not true. I was 10 years old. I was just a kid who wanted her to be proud of me. I understood that she was afraid of losing Darren. But why did she have to treat me like the enemy? I was her child, too. My hand kept slapping against the door. I was trying to tell them they had forgotten to turn the freezer off. Mom, come on. I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not that fragile. Do you really think I'd get depressed just because my little brother's smarter than me? Darren's voice was tight with worry. What if that psychic was making it all up? You can't lock West up over something like that. Dad, cut in right away. That's enough, Darren. We're not letting you take that risk. He turned toward the freezer and his tone dropped heavier. Now more measured. West. We're doing this for the whole family. You don't want to watch your brother jump off a building because of you, do you? Just stay in there. Once Darren finishes his exam, all of this will be over, okay? I could not answer. The cold had already seeped all the way into my lungs. My chest ached like the frost was cracking it open from the inside. I pulled together everything I had left and hit the door one last time. Mom came storming over and kicked it. Wesley Merritt, what the hell is your problem? Do I need to come in there and deal with you myself? Then she opened it. The door cracked open just enough for a sliver of light to get through. And my heart jumped into my throat as I saved Mrs. Merritt. A soft, gentle voice stopped her. It was Norris and Claire, the girl I had grown up next door to. The one I had promised to get into the same college with. She was standing right there at the freezer door talking. Mom down west has always been competitive. Anything you say to him right now is just gonna go in one ear and out the other. She paused, then turned toward the freezer and softened her voice. Wes, I know you think this isn't fair. But your brother didn't do anything wrong. He shouldn't have to be the one who pays for your ambition. Just listen to your mom this time, okay? There was no answer from inside because I could not move anymore. My body was locked in place like a snapped icicle, still frozen in the position of knocking. The blood from my forehead had sealed my eyes shut, and the warm trickle down one side of my face had already turned to ice. I stared through the crack in the door with everything I had left. Mom, just open it. You're so close. I'm right here. I murmured to myself. However, the light disappeared. The door was shut again. I heard Nora let out a quiet sigh on the other side. West, don't worry. Once Darren gets through this safely, I'll talk your parents into letting you retake the SATs next year. We can still end up at the same school. Footsteps faded away. All of them were gone. And the room went completely silent. I stayed there, locked in that same position. Hands still raised against the door. And then I stopped breathing. Mom was so close. Just a little more. And she would have found me from somewhere outside myself. I watched them pile around Darren and load him into the car. Mom straightened his clothes. Dad adjusted the seat for him. Nora handed him a bottle of water. They were all smiling, relaxed, and relieved. While I was alone in the freezer. Now a statue that would never speak again. Mom and Dad predicted Darren's death down to the day. But what about mine? My soul followed Darren to the exam hall. Everyone around him was writing furiously. But Darren could not sit still. And he kept glancing at the clock. The first day of testing ended. He got back to the hotel. And immediately grabbed our parents to go home. I'm still worried about Wes. He barely ate anything last night. And didn't have breakfast this morning. We need to go check on him. Mom frowned. Check on what? He's only gone one day without eating. Do you think that matters more than your exam? Darren's eyes went red. He stood up to leave. But Mom slapped him. Her voice cracked when she spoke. Darren, your only job these next few days is to focus on your test. Otherwise, your brother's sacrifice would have been for nothing. Wouldn't it? Darren bit his lip. Then Mom added, stay here. I'll run home and grab your thermos. I'll check on your brother while I'm there. Darren finally exhaled in relief. Mom was home. Before long. She picked up the thermos from the coffee table. Then walked over to the freezer door. And let her voice go a little softer. West, I know you're upset. But everything we did was to keep your brother safe. Just hang in there a little longer. Once Darren's done with his exams, we'll all go on a trip together as a family. I'll get you that model kit you've been wanting. How does that sound? There was no response. Mom's expression hardened. Wesley, she dropped her voice low. When are you going to stop making everything about yourself? You'd let your brother die over your pride. How can you be this selfish? She slammed her palm against the door with every word. Then her hand stopped. She frowned. Muttering to herself, why is it so cold? She reached for the handle and pulled the door. Cracked open again, and a corner of my school uniform came into view. Right then. Dad called. What's taking so long? Darren's waiting for his water. Mom hesitated for 2 seconds. Then let go of the handle. It can wait until after the exam. She turned and walked away. On the other side of the door. My body was still slumped against it. Hand frozen in place, still raised to knock. I floated there somewhere outside of everything. Watching her walk away, helpless to stop her. She had been one turn of the handle away from finding my body. That evening. Darren found out I was still locked in and immediately texted me, West. Mom said the key's under the doormat. Get out and eat something. I left food for you in the kitchen. You know how your stomach gets. So make sure you heat it up first. Darren always remembered that I had a serious stomach condition. And every time they locked me in the freezer over the years, he was the one who found a way to sneak food over to me. He had even put a stuffed bear inside the freezer. For that exact reason, hiding snacks in its round little belly. So I would have something to eat. I drifted there in the void and looked at the bear. Its stomach was bulging again. Darren had already stocked it for me. But I was never going to eat any of it. The next morning, Darren woke up and checked his phone right away. I still had not replied. He went looking for Mom immediately. Panic already setting in. I texted West and told him where the key was. But he hasn't answered. What if he doesn't have his phone with him? Mom, don't you have the security camera for the freezer? Just let me take a look at him. Mom frowned. Your brother's not stupid. He's doing this on purpose to make you worry. She pulled out her phone anyway. The monitoring app loaded. And the live feed from the freezer filled the screen in the frame. I had my back to the camera. Darren leaned in close. West. The key's under the doormat. There's food in the kitchen. Heat it up yourself and please eat something. I did not respond. Mom frowned again. If you've come to your senses, get yourself out of there and eat. Stop making your brother worry. I still had my back to the camera. I had not moved at all. Darren started to panic. He pressed his face right up against the screen. West, are you feeling okay? Turn around and let me see you. Mom's expression shifted. She zoomed in on the feed. Under the dim light, I was curled up in the corner. My body curled into a tight ball. Mom stared at the screen for 2 seconds. Then she sighed and even let out a short, cold laugh. This again. When I was little, I used to do things like this to get her attention. She thought I was pulling the same trick. Wesley, we already told you where the key is. If you have any decency at all, you'll get yourself out of there. Stop messing with your brother's head before his exam. She locked the screen and tossed the phone aside. I managed a bitter smile. If Mom had looked for just 3 more seconds, if she had zoomed in just a little further, she would have seen that my chest was not moving. She was so close to realizing I was already dead. The last exam ended. Darren was the first one out of the testing hall. Mom, Dad. I did great. Everything's fine. Let's go home and tell West the good news. Dad nodded. His eyes were glassy as he started the car. Good, good. It's all over now. We'll head back right now. Your brother's been home alone for 2 days. That should have been enough time for him to come around. We'll pick him up and the whole family can go to church together. Mom sat in the passenger seat, tears running down her face. I was too hard on Wes. I know that as long as he's willing to change. From now on, whatever Darren has, he'll have to. I floated there in the void, wearing a smile that was worse than any cry. Mom, Dad. I had waited 18 years for this. Too bad I never lived to see it. The car pulled into the driveway. Before long, Darren was the first one through the front door. Then he stopped. The food on the kitchen table had not been touched. It was already growing mold. His voice started to shake. West he hasn't come out in 2 days. Mom froze for a second. Then her expression went dark. She stormed over to the freezer door and kicked it. Wesley, are you still at it? Do you have any idea what your brother's been through the past few days? He couldn't eat and couldn't sleep. He was worrying about you the entire time he was taking his exams. As for you, you're in there playing dead. Who's that supposed to impress? Dad could not hold back either. He walked over with barely controlled anger in his voice. West, I am so disappointed in you. We spent 2 days out there thinking about you every second. But have you thought about what you've done at all? Darren stepped between them, his voice trembling. Dad. Mom. West wouldn't act like this for no reason. Something's wrong. Both of their expressions stiffened for a moment. That was when Nora walked in. She went straight to the freezer door, holding up her phone. I just got a call from our homeroom teacher. She found out Wes missed the SATs. And she's already trying to get him into an elite early admission track. Her voice dropped. Wes, did you tell her? Why would you do that? Mom exploded like someone had lit a fuse. Wesley, we raised you for 18 years. And this is how you repay us? You missed the SAT. So now you're going behind our backs to destroy your brother's chances. Dad's face was like stone. Your brother has done nothing but protect you. Yet all you can think about is how to drag him down here. We were rushing home to take you to pray with the family. Wesley, how did I end up with a son like you? Everyone was passing judgment on me. Everyone except Darren, who pushed past all of them and grabbed the freezer door handle. Mom, the door is freezing cold. Mom's eyes were bloodshot enough. She shoved her way forward and grabbed the handle herself. The heavy iron latch resisted her at first. Frost had crusted around the rubber gaskets, fusing the industrial seal into a solid lip of white rime. My mother scoffed, her face twisted in that familiar, ugly mask of self-righteous exasperation. Still leaning on the door like a spiteful brat, she muttered, bracing her heel against the tiled threshold and giving the handle a violent, two-handed yank. The seal gave way with a dry, splintering crack. Instantly, a wall of Arctic air tumbled out into the hallway. It wasn't the stale, room-temperature draft she expected. It was a dense, fog-laden wave of -22 degrees, a blast so sharp and biting that the moisture on her eyelashes froze within a second. A white plume billowed past her face, smelling faintly of frozen copper and the synthetic polyester of my school uniform. The hallway fell dead silent. What? Dad took a step forward, waving away the vapor. Why is it this cold? The fog thinned. And there I was. I remained in the corner where I had spent my final hours. My legs were drawn tightly against my chest, knees locked against my ribs like carved stone. My right arm was still raised, elbow stiff, hand balled into a fist that hovered in the exact shape of a frantic knock. The blood from where my father's kick had driven my skull into the shelving bracket had trickled down the bridge of my nose and across my cheek. It was no longer liquid, it had frozen into a thick, dark crimson glaze, sealing my left eye shut. My right eye was half open, clouded by a pale, milky film of ice, staring fixedly at the exact gap in the doorway where Nora had stood 2 mornings ago. Wes? Darren whispered. He didn't scream. He didn't rush forward. His voice came out as a fragile, paper-thin rasp, stripped of breath. Mother took a step back, her hand lingering on the latch. Her expression was a chaotic storm of irritation, confusion, and the very first prick of instinctual terror. Wesley, she barked, though her voice lacked its usual sharp resonance. Trembling at the edges. Get up. Stop this ridiculous theater. Your brother is home. The test is over. Get up and go shower. I did not move. I could not move. I was merely watching from the ceiling, hovering like dust in the cold draft. Wesley Merritt, she shrieked, taking a furious step inside the freezer. She reached down to seize my shoulder, intending to shake me awake, to drag me onto my feet so she could lecture me about respect. The moment her bare fingers made contact with the nape of my neck, she gasped. Her fingers didn't sink into warm flesh or tense muscle. They struck something as unyielding as a marble monument. The cold bit into her skin so viciously that she yanked her hand back with an involuntary hiss of pain. A pale smear of white frost transferred from my skin to her palm. She looked down at her fingers, her pupils dilating into pinpricks. Richard, his skin, why is he hard? Move. Darren didn't just shove past our parents, he hurled them out of his way with a guttural, feral roar. He dropped to his knees on the steel floor, the impact bruising his kneecaps, and threw his arms around me. Wes, look at me. Wes, I'm sorry, I'm here. Dad, call an ambulance. Call an ambulance right now. Darren pulled me against his chest, trying to force my curled limbs open, trying to breathe his own warm air into my frozen face. But my body didn't bend. My frozen spine held its rigid curve. When Darren squeezed my shoulders, the frozen fabric of my school uniform crackled like dry autumn leaves. From the top shelf above us, shaken loose by Darren's frantic movements, a small, plush brown bear tumbled down. It struck the metal floor with a dull thud. Its belly, stitched shut with clumsy fishing line and stuffed with crushed granola bars and chocolate packets, split open, scattering melted and refrozen snacks across my rigid sneakers. Darren looked down at the bear. He looked at my face. A sound tore out of his throat, a wet, strangled howl that rattled the stainless steel walls. He buried his face in my frozen neck, sobbing with a force that shook his entire body. No. Wes, please, you promised we'd see the scores together. Wes. In the hallway, Nora's phone slipped from her hand. It hit the hardwood floor. The glass shattering across the screen, where the homeroom teacher's number was still displayed. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She backed away until her spine hit the opposite wall, her hands coming up to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with a sick, paralyzing realization. Mrs. Merritt. Nora choked out, her voice barely a whisper. You told me the power was off. You told me it was just a dark room. My father stood frozen in the doorway. His jaw twitched once, twice, before he looked at the thermostat control mounted on the exterior wall. The small digital display glowed in bright, mocking green, -22 degrees Fahrenheit, active. Cooling. Dad reached out, his hands shaking violently, and touched the metal housing. The switch. I thought I flipped the breaker. You locked it, Darren screamed, his head snapping back toward them, tears freezing against his cheeks as he held my frozen corpse. You locked it from the outside. He was 10 years old when you put him in here the first time, and you locked him in here again. You killed him. You killed my brother. The emergency sirens did not sound like rescue, they sounded like judgment. Within 20 minutes, our quiet suburban driveway was flooded with the flashing crimson and sapphire lights of 3 police cruisers and an ambulance. Paramedics rushed in with stretchers, defibrillators, and heated thermal blankets, but the moment the lead medic stepped into the freezer and pressed 2 gloved fingers against the side of my neck, everything stopped. He didn't reach for the defibrillator pads. He didn't hook up oxygen. He simply took a long, slow breath, turned to his partner, and shook his head. "Call the coroner," the medic said softly. "And get the detectives in here. Rigor mortis has already passed, this is full-body cryostiffening. Time of death is at least 36 to 48 hours ago." 48 hours ago. Mother was sitting on the living room sofa, a shock blanket draped over her shoulders. When she heard those words carried down the hallway, her head jerked up. "That's impossible," she said, her voice rising into a sharp, hysterical laugh. "That's a lie. I checked the camera yesterday morning. I saw him moving. He had his back to us, but he was sulking. He was just ignoring me because he was angry about the SATs." A young police officer, his notebook out, frowned at her with deep disgust. "Ma'am, a body at -22 degrees doesn't move after 48 hours. If you saw him yesterday morning, you were looking at a corpse." Mother's face drained of every drop of color. I floated beside her, watching the gears turn in her mind. She was remembering the security feed. She was remembering how she had laughed at the screen, how she had called me selfish, how she had tossed her phone onto the hotel bed and walked out to buy Darren breakfast while I sat dead in the corner, illuminated by the infrared lens. "No," she whimpered, clawing at her own hair. "No, no, no. It was the prophecy. The psychic said. The psychic said death was coming for this house. It was supposed to save Darren. Everything we did was to keep Darren alive." Detective Miller, a seasoned investigator with graying hair and hollow, exhausted eyes, walked out of the kitchen holding 2 evidence bags. In the first bag was the exterior padlock and the metal latch pin from the freezer door. In the second bag was Mother's phone, open to the surveillance app. "Mrs. Merritt, Mr. Merritt," Detective Miller said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You are both under arrest for aggravated child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and depraved heart second-degree murder. Step up and put your hands behind your backs." "Wait." Dad scrambled off the floor, his hands raised placatingly. "You don't understand. This was a disciplinary measure. Our son had severe behavioral issues, he was trying to sabotage his brother's future. We forgot the cooling unit was operational. It was an accident." "An accident?" Darren's voice sliced through the room. He walked out of the hallway, escorted by a paramedic who was trying to treat the mild frostbite on Darren's hands and face from where he had clung to me. Darren's eyes were completely bloodshot, vacant of any familial warmth, hollowed out by pure, undiluted hatred. "You told him the key was under the doormat," Darren whispered, pointing a trembling finger at our mother. "You texted me that you left the key for him. But the door wasn't just latched. Dad padlocked it from the outside. I saw the padlock on the floor when I ran in." Dad opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You told me he was eating," Darren continued, tears carving clean lines through the frost dust on his skin. "You let me sit in that exam hall for 2 days. Thinking Wes was resting at home. You made me write that test on top of his grave. Darren, sweetheart, we did it for you." Mother shrieked as the officer forced her arms behind her back, the steel handcuffs clicking shut around her wrists. "The woman with the cards. She said if Wesley took the exam, you would jump. She said his brilliance would swallow you whole. We were protecting you. I never asked to be protected from my brother." Darren screamed, lunging forward until 2 officers caught him under the arms, holding him back. "Wes was the only person in this house who actually loved me. You didn't protect me, you murdered him to feed your own sick paranoia." Nora tried to approach Darren, her face wet with tears, her hands trembling. Darren, I didn't know. I thought your mom just turned the light off to humble him. I swear I didn't know the freezer was running." Darren turned his gaze toward her. There was no pity in his eyes, only a bone-chilling repulsion. He loved you, Nora, Darren said, his voice dropping to a deathly quiet register. He stayed up until 3 in the morning every night for 6 months. Writing study guides for you so you could pass the AP calculus exam. And when he was dying behind that door, you told him he was selfish. Nora flinched as if struck across the face. She sank to the floor of our foyer, weeping into her hands, completely alone. They carried my body out in a heavy, black vinyl pouch. I followed it. I found that I wasn't tethered to the house, I was tethered to the truth. As the coroner's van pulled away, I drifted beside Darren. He sat in the back of a social services cruiser, his knuckles white, staring down at his phone. The news broke within 12 hours. In an affluent town where academic success was worshipped like a religion, the story of the Merritt family exploded across local and national headlines. Suburban parents arrested, high school prodigy locked in walk-in freezer to prevent him from outscoring brother on SATs. The prophecy murder, how? Superstition and parental cruelty froze an 18-year-old genius to death. The fallout was instantaneous and absolute. At our high school, where my empty desk had sat untouched during the exam period, students built a memorial of white chrysanthemums, candles, and printed copies of the study notes I had shared freely with everyone who asked. Our homeroom teacher, Mrs. Gable, broke down during a televised press conference. Wesley was one of the most brilliant minds this district has ever seen, she said, her voice shaking with rage and grief. He scored a perfect 15/20 on his SAT without studying. When I called his home to offer him a full early admission nomination to MIT, his mother told me he had run away from home because he was ashamed of his poor character. She lied to me. She was hiding what they did to him. The revelation destroyed Nora Sinclair. The prestigious liberal arts college that had offered Nora an early admissions track rescinded her acceptance within 48 hours after police released the audio transcripts from the hallway surveillance camera. The audio had captured Nora's calm, condescending voice through the freezer door. Wes, I know you think this isn't fair, but your brother didn't do anything wrong. He shouldn't have to be the one who pays for your ambition. The internet tore her apart. Her name became synonymous with the cruelty that killed me. Her friends blocked her numbers, her front lawn was vandalized with red spray paint that read collaborator. She did not leave her bedroom for weeks, trapped in her own prison of guilt. Meanwhile, inside the county jail, my parents sat in separate concrete cells. Because my body had been preserved in sub-zero temperatures, the medical examiner's autopsy was extraordinarily precise. The report was a catalogue of 18 years of calculated torture. 1. Multiple healed microfractures in both hands and feet, consistent with repeated, severe cold-induced tissue damage dating back to age 10. 2. Chronic, severe gastritis and ulcerations, caused by prolonged nutritional deprivation and extreme psychological stress. 3. A fatal blunt force contusion on the left temple, matching the edge of the freezer shelving, accompanied by acute hypothermia as the primary cause of death. 4. Traces of cardboard and raw ice found in the digestive tract, evidence that in my final hours of life, I had tried to eat frost and packaging scraps to stave off the gnawing pain in my stomach. When Detective Miller read the autopsy findings to my father during interrogation, Dad sat in silence, staring down at the steel table. It was the cold, Dad whispered, his voice cracked and hollow. The psychic said the fire of his mind would burn Darren up. We thought cooling him down was the only way. You didn't cool him down, Mr. Merritt, Miller said, leaning in, his face dark with fury. You murdered a boy who would have given you the world if you'd shown him an ounce of love. While our parents awaited trial, Darren refused to stay with our extended relatives who had conveniently looked the other way for 18 years. Whenever I showed up to holiday dinners with frost-cracked hands and bruised wrists. Instead, Darren stayed in an extended-stay motel near the courthouse. He had only one obsession, Madam Vance, the psychic. Darren spent days combing through Mother's old bank statements, tax returns, and locked drawers in our abandoned house. What he found made his blood run cold. Over the course of 18 years, our mother had transferred over $380,000 to an entity named Vance Spiritual Consulting LLC. Darren took the files directly to Detective Miller. 3 days later, police raided a lavish Victorian estate on the outskirts of the state capital. Madam Vance, whose real name was Evelyn Higgins, a former disgraced clinical nurse who had pivoted into high-end spiritual artistry, was arrested. I drifted into the interrogation room where Miller and the district attorney confronted her. Evelyn Higgins sat in an expensive silk blouse, her manicured fingers drumming nervously on the table. When Miller threw the crime scene photos of my frozen body onto the metal surface, she flinched and looked away. I didn't tell them to kill him, she stammered. I'm a spiritual advisor. People pay me for readings. I don't control what they do with the guidance. Guidance? Miller slammed his palm onto the table. You told an unstable, narcissistic mother that her youngest son was a spiritual parasite whose intellectual success would drive her eldest son to suicide on the day of his SAT results. The prosecutor leaned forward, opening a thick binder of financial records. We have your text messages with Mrs. Merritt dating back 12 years, Evelyn. Whenever Wesley showed high academic performance, when he won the state science fair at 12, when he skipped a grade at 14, you demanded an emergency cleansing fee of $20,000 to cast counter curses. And when the family's money started running low last year, you escalated. The prosecutor turned a page and read directly from a transcript. Evelyn Higgins, text to Mrs. Merritt, 6 months ago, the boy's light is too bright. If he sits for the SATs, the psychic resonance will snap Darren's soul. On the day the scores arrive, Darren will jump from the highest point of his school. You must ensure Wesley cannot sit for that exam. Bind him. Keep him in the dark and the cold where his aura cannot bloom. You manufactured an 18-year crisis to milk an idiot mother out of her life savings, Miller snarled. You knew Wesley was being abused. Mrs. Merritt told you in 2018 that they locked him in a freezer overnight, and you replied, good. Cold suppresses the ego. Evelyn Higgins went gray. She slumped back into her chair, her lawyers whispering frantically in her ear, but it was over. She was charged with accessory to second-degree murder, extortion, and felony child endangerment. When Darren received the call informing him of the charges, he was sitting on the floor of his motel room. He didn't cheer. He didn't celebrate. He merely looked at the framed photo of me that he had stolen from our school's track and field roster, the only photo in existence where I was smiling, because our parents had never allowed my picture to be hung on the walls of our home. She made it up, Wes, Darren whispered to the empty room, hugging the frame to his chest. It was all fake. It was all just money. I knelt beside him, placing my translucent hand over his trembling fingers. He couldn't feel my warmth, I had none left to give, but for a brief moment, his breathing stabilized. The trial of Richard and Eleanor Merritt lasted 14 agonizing days. The courtroom was packed every morning with journalists, classmates, and citizens demanding justice. Mother sat at the defense table, her hair unwashed, her eyes sunken into dark sockets. She had aged 20 years in 3 months. She still wore her wedding ring, twisting it compulsively until the skin on her knuckle was raw and bleeding. Dad sat beside her, staring blankly at the floorboards, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Their defense attorney attempted to plead diminished capacity, arguing that my parents suffered from a shared psychotic disorder induced by the psychic's manipulation. Then, Darren took the witness stand. He wore a dark suit that was slightly too large for him, a suit our parents had bought for him to wear to college interviews that would never happen. The prosecutor stepped forward. Darren, can you describe your relationship with your brother, Wesley? Darren looked straight at our parents. Wes was better than me at everything, Darren said clearly, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom. He was kinder. He was smarter. When we were kids, I struggled with reading comprehension. Wes was 4 years younger than me, but he would hide under my bedsheets with a flashlight, turning the pages of my books and whispering the definitions of words so I wouldn't feel embarrassed in class. Mother let out a quiet sob, but Darren didn't stop. Every time our parents hurt him, Wes didn't hate me. He pitied them. He used to tell me, Darren, Mom and Dad are just scared. Once we both grow up and get into college, we can rent an apartment together and they won't be scared anymore. Darren paused, swallowing hard, his knuckles turning white on the wooden railing of the witness box. When I was 16, I found out about the prophecy. I told my parents it was garbage. I begged them to stop locking him up. But they didn't do it because they loved me. They did it because they couldn't stand the fact that Wesley was brilliant without their permission. They wanted a trophy they could control, and Wesley was too extraordinary to be controlled. The prosecutor turned to the jury. Your Honor, the state calls for the presentation of evidence Exhibit 14, the security footage from the morning of May 4th. The courtroom lights dimmed. On the large projector screen, the high-definition footage from the walk-in freezer played in complete, agonizing clarity. The jury watched as my mother cracked the door open. They saw the faint sliver of light fall across my face. They saw my frozen hand raised in a perpetual knock. They saw the frost clinging to my eyelashes. And then, they watched as my mother looked at my body, sighed with cold annoyance, muttered, "It can wait until after the exam," and pulled the door shut, plunging the screen back into pitch blackness. Several jurors gasped. 2 women on the front row covered their eyes and began to weep openly. Even the defense attorney looked down at his legal pad, unable to look at the screen. Mother broke. She stood up from her chair, knocking it over, screaming toward the witness. Stand. Darren. I did it for you. Look at me. You're alive. The prophecy didn't take you. You're standing right there. Judge Vance banged his gavel with furious, rhythmic force. Order. Restrain the defendant. Darren didn't flinch. He looked down from the stand at the woman who gave birth to us, his eyes as cold as the ice that had stopped my heart. You didn't save my life, Mother, Darren said, his voice cutting through her screams. You took the only part of my life that was worth living. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty. First-degree murder with special circumstances of torture. Aggravated child abuse. Conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. Both Richard and Eleanor Merritt were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. They would spend the rest of their natural lives inside concrete cells, confined, isolated, and forgotten. As they were led away in chains, Mother turned back one last time, her voice cracked and pleading, Darren. Please visit me. Darren, I'm your mother. Darren didn't turn around. He walked out of the courtroom doors into the blinding summer sun and never looked back. 2 weeks later, the day arrived. June 24th. The official release date for the national SAT scores. The exact date the psychic had marked 18 years ago, the day she claimed Darren would jump from the school rooftop to end his life. I followed Darren as he walked through the quiet streets of our town. He wore his normal clothes, jeans, a faded t-shirt, and sneakers. In his backpack, he carried 2 envelopes that had arrived in the mail that morning. He walked past the high school gates, past the empty athletic fields, and entered the main building. The school was closed for the summer, but the maintenance doors were unlocked for roof repairs. Darren climbed the concrete stairs, flight after flight, until he pushed open the heavy metal door leading to the roof. The summer wind was warm, carrying the scent of cut grass and blooming honeysuckle. The sky was an unbroken, brilliant sapphire blue. Darren walked to the edge of the parapet. I drifted beside him, my heart clenching in terror. Even in death, the shadow of that cursed prophecy lingered like poison. Darren, no, I thought, reaching out toward him with phantom hands. Please. Darren. Don't let them be right. Don't finish their curse. Darren stood on the edge, looking down at the empty courtyard 4 stories below. The wind ruffled his hair. He unzipped his backpack. He pulled out the first envelope, Darren Merritt's official SAT score report. He opened it. A composite score of 1310. A respectable, solid score. Then, he pulled out the second envelope. It was an official document sent by the College Board and the State Department of Education, signed personally by the board director. Following the public revelation of my death, the testing committee had evaluated my 4 years of unweighted 4.0 coursework, my perfect SATs, and my state academic Olympiad papers, issuing an honorary posthumous Master Scholar diploma and a certified assessment of a projected 1600. Darren looked at the 2 papers side by side. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a brass lighter. He held the psychic's warding charms, the dried herbs, the carved wooden talismans, the embroidered protection bags that our mother had forced him to carry in his pocket since childhood, and dropped them onto the gravel roof. He flicked the lighter. The flame caught instantly. The charms blackened, curled into ash, and dissolved into smoke, carried away by the warm summer breeze. Darren did not climb onto the ledge. Instead, he sat down on the rough gravel with his back against the brick chimney, drew his knees up, and looked out over the horizon where the sun was beginning to set in brilliant streaks of gold and violet. "I know you're here, Wes," Darren said softly. A tear slipped down his cheek, but for the first time in 18 years, it wasn't a tear of fear or shame. It was a tear of release. "They spent 18 years trying to make me hate you," Darren said, his voice steady, carrying over the rooftop. "They spent 18 years trying to convince me that your light would extinguish mine. But they were wrong. Your light is the only reason I know how to see." Darren unfolded the honorary certificate bearing my name. "I'm not jumping, Wes," he whispered, smiling through his tears. "I'm going to college. I'm going to study law. I'm going to make sure that kids like you, kids who are locked in dark rooms by people who claim to love them, have someone who will kick the door down." He pressed the paper to his heart. "You don't have to stay here and watch over me anymore, little brother. I'm safe. Now. You're free." As his words settled into the evening air, a profound warmth suddenly bloomed in the center of my chest, a warmth I hadn't felt since I was 10 years old, running home with a perfect test score in my hand. The phantom chill in my bones, the frozen blood on my face, the heavy weight of the -22-degree air, all of it dissolved like mist under the morning sun. I looked at Darren one last time. He was sitting peacefully in the golden hour. Light, strong, alive, and unburdened. I stepped back into the sky, feeling the cold finally leave me, replaced by an infinite, radiant light. "Goodbye, Darren," I murmured, my voice finally finding its sound in the wind. "Live a long, brilliant life." And for the first time in 18 years, I wasn't cold anymore.